NASA headquarters, New York, 2042. The glass atrium reflected the night sky like a black mirror. Satellite images lined the halls, glowing faintly as guests walked past, each orbit drawn like silver rings circling the Earth. They called it a farewell party. To Evelyn Cho, 65 after 40 years of guiding orbital systems, farewell sounded borrowed. She had never felt she could truly leave the sky. "Congratulations, Dr. Cho." Hands reached out, champagne glasses clinked, speeches overlapped in polite gratitude. Evelyn smiled the way she was expected to, shook hands, and let her eyes drift back to the illuminated displays of the latest satellites. In the corner, a jazz trio played something old and familiar. Young colleagues gathered in clusters, watching her with a mix of reverence and impatience, the impatience of those about to inherit the controls. Then the host announced the special guest speaker. Lights softened. A figure in a tailored suit stepped onto the stage. Julian, her son, 34, founder of a hyped-up AI startup the press called the unicorn in the elevator. Applause erupted, cameras flashing. Julian hugged his mother, kissed her cheek, a quick public gesture. "Tonight," Julian began, his voice smooth through the sound system, "I want to say one thing. I'm proud to share that the breakthrough AI my company has built was made possible by the foundation my mother invented. Sometimes time doesn't stop, but it slows enough that you can hear the faintest vibration in the air." Evelyn straightened her spine, just slightly. No one noticed. "The foundation my mother invented." Those words rolled through her like stones. She had never signed away those rights, never allowed that system to be commercialized, never once agreed to let it be anyone's foundation for profit. Applause thundered. A colleague squeezed her elbow and whispered, "What a devoted son, honoring his mother like that." Evelyn only nodded. Her answer for now was silence. By midnight, when only janitors and stray flower arrangements remained, Evelyn found Julian standing by a window overlooking the river. The city lights outside bled into a blur of gold and blue. "What system were you talking about?" she asked. No anger, no dramatics, just a line drawn straight across a map. Julian's smile flickered. "Mom, tonight's about you. Let's not talk shop." "Precisely because it's about me, I'm asking. Which system?" A brief crack crossed his eyes before he smoothed it over. "I mean inspiration. Your life's work inspired me. I only meant it that way." "Inspiration doesn't require a license," Evelyn replied, voice calm as a meter reading. Julian's hand landed lightly on her shoulder, a practiced touch. "Come on, Mom, it's late. Let's go home." He pivoted away faster than changing a channel. Evelyn said nothing more. Through the window, satellites crept across the sky like broken promises orbiting just out of reach. Back in her Upper West Side apartment, Evelyn unclipped the small orbit-shaped pin from her jacket and set it beside a photograph of her late husband. Taken in a lab in 2003, both of them young, defiant, eyes lit with certainty. He had died in an experiment accident, a miscalculation no bigger than a speck of dust, but enough to shift an entire structure off balance. Evelyn tilted the photo under the desk lamp, catching his steady gaze. That year they had turned down a defense contractor's check. "Science serves the living, not death," he had said. She remembered every word. They had never been rich, but they had been clean. After the funeral, Julian, only 12 then, had stood on a chair in the kitchen, voice cracking as he poured himself milk. "You don't have to sell anything, Mom. I'll build something bigger. From me, not from you." His hand shook, but his eyes burned with conviction. Evelyn hadn't cried that night. She'd paced the apartment floor, measuring each step like solving a complex equation. That promise came knocking again now, pounding in her temples. At 5 a.m., she rose, as always, black coffee, desk light. She opened her private archive, contracts, appendices, provisional patents. She remembered every clause, every line like constellations she had charted. Her phone buzzed, a message from Priya, an old friend still at NASA. "Your son's speech last night a bit much. You okay?" Evelyn typed back, "I need two things: access logs from the internal patent vault for the last 3 months and any shadow filings carrying the Calypso Delta algorithm's fingerprint." "Priya, you still remember the code name." "Evelyn, of course, it wasn't meant as a metaphor." A pause, then a file transfer came through. "Not in the NASA vault, but there's a metadata trail leading to a private IP registry. Corporate name, Orion Labs Holdings." Evelyn's coffee cup landed on the tablecloth hard enough to spill a brown ring. Orion, a constellation, too easy a disguise. She pulled up the registry's public database. There it was, a cluster of filings from the past 6 months, branching exactly like the system she had spent a decade refining. Authorship credited to Propulsion AI Research Group, Orion Labs. No mention of Evelyn. Legal representative, Amara Sethai. Not Julian. Evelyn pressed her temples. Amara, the polished venture capitalist who sent her expensive flowers with carefully worded notes. "I admire your journey, Mom. The emoji's always perfectly chosen." Evelyn shut the screen off. Silence filled the apartment like water receding, leaving mud behind. She walked to her bookshelf, pulled down a black binder labeled Personal Contract Principles. The first page held a clause she had drafted herself decades ago. Any transfer or derivative use of the original algorithm requires the author's wet ink signature. Without it, the contract is null and void. Her husband used to joke, "You plan like an old woman already." Evelyn had been planning like one since she was young. That afternoon, she called Amara. Her voice was as soft as drizzle. "Sweetheart, I'd love to stop by your office with some holiday cake. I have too much time on my hands these days." Amara laughed brightly. "Of course, Mom, I'll let reception know 4 o'clock. Perfect." At the 47th floor office, Evelyn carried the cake box like a peace offering. Minimalist lobby, moss wall, no paper in sight. She smiled. "Show me your workspace." Amara clicked across the floor in heels. "Busy days, Mom. New fund, new deals. You know how it is in the age of AI." Evelyn nodded, her eyes catching fleeting screens in a side room. Data rooms, due diligence milestones, preferred vendors. One logo flashed, the same IP registry she had just traced. She didn't pause, she only memorized. Amara poured tea, smiled the smile of someone trained to close deals. "Julian is so lucky to have you. Your dedication to science for humanity is inspiring." "Yes," Evelyn said, fingers brushing the table's grain. "For humanity." They talked politely about the weather and river reeds. Evelyn left before Amara could wrap things up. "Old bones don't like elevators," she joked. Walking out, she noted 2 things: the Orion logo tucked in the corner of a slide on the wall monitor, and a whiteboard schedule, Friday pre-IPO narrative run-through. Later, at Julian's condo, the biometric lock chirped open at her touch. He had bragged about it just last week. Inside, the scent of coffee lingered. On the wall's screen, a missed call notification blinked. Evelyn caught a glimpse of a text thread before it faded. "Mr. H, keep your mother quiet. 6 more months till funding lands. Don't shake the tree now." "Julian, I know." The screen went dark. Evelyn stood frozen in the quiet, her heartbeat steady, measured like an atomic clock ticking in some hidden lab. The steadiness hurt more than any surge of anger. She didn't cry here. She lifted her coat, left silently, closing the door with such care the system didn't even chime goodbye. That night, back in her apartment, she pulled out the black binder again. Read the clause, word by word. She set a small recorder on the table, checked the battery, old habits. She opened a fresh document, Plan for Intellectual Property Violation, Orion Labs. Objective, restore full authorship rights and safeguard the algorithm's civilian purpose. Principle, no moral compromise, no easy deals. Tools, law, evidence, silence used at the right time. She set down her pen, looked out the window. Another bright dot crossed the sky, a commercial satellite gliding past. She thought of Julian at 12, promising to build something bigger, and Julian at 34, brushing her off at her own farewell party. Two versions of the same boy, diverging like orbits gone out of sync. Tomorrow she would call Lawson, the former student she once taught to read contracts the way astronomers read star maps. Tonight, she turned off the lamp. Darkness fell like a closing hatch. Oddly enough, Evelyn felt light. She wasn't leaving the sky. She was only switching command posts. She hadn't stopped working. She was simply moving her hands to the right controls again. And somewhere in the city, a binder labeled Orion blinked on a dashboard, awaiting Friday. Evelyn smiled faintly. The real game would not be played on stage with champagne and speeches. It would unfold in papers, signatures, and silences sharp enough to cut. That was her terrain, and she knew every corridor. Snow dusted the sidewalks of Manhattan like spilled salt. Evelyn walked with a measured pace, coat collar turned up, eyes set not on the shop windows, but on the reflections that flickered across them. Every move she made had to appear ordinary. She wasn't a retired NASA engineer on the verge of taking her own son and daughter-in-law to war. She was just another woman buying groceries, visiting friends, taking the subway. Inside, though, her mind ran calculations. Orbits, angles, blind spots. Every investigation was a launch. Get the math wrong and the rocket explodes before leaving the pad. A favor from an old student. She called Lawson that morning. He answered on the first ring. Professor Cho. His voice carried the same mixture of reverence and nerves it had 20 years ago in her seminar on ethics in aerospace engineering. I'm retired now. Just Evelyn, she corrected. I need your help, Lawson. You're a tech attorney now, aren't you? Head of IP litigation for Easton and Dyer, he said, clearing his throat. What's going on? I'll send you some documents. Look closely at the original clause, then compare it to the filings under Orion Labs. There was a silence, long enough for Evelyn to picture him pushing his glasses up the bridge of his nose like he used to. Then, if what you're suggesting is true, they're skating on fraud, dangerous fraud. Evelyn exhaled, exactly the kind I don't want buried. Playing the visitor. The following week, she returned to Amara's office, this time uninvited. She carried no cake, only a polite smile. I was nearby and thought I'd drop in, Evelyn said. Retirement is boring. I crave adult company. Amara, caught off guard, gestured stiffly. Of course, Mom, come in. While Amara talked about fundraising rounds and unicorn valuations, Evelyn let her eyes roam. A calendar lay open on the desk. Investor Gala 90 days. A folder on the sideboard was stamped. Calypso Integration Plan. She kept her voice light. You must be so busy. Julian doesn't tire you out with his grand ideas. Amara laughed, but her fingers tightened on the folder edge. We balance each other. He's vision, I'm execution. Execution. Evelyn filed the word away like evidence. Cracks in the facade. That evening, Evelyn hosted a small dinner at her apartment. She invited 2 former colleagues still inside NASA. They thought it was just a nostalgic get-together. Between bites of braised short ribs, Evelyn leaned back. Have you noticed the recent surge of AI patents tied to orbital navigation? Orion Labs keeps appearing on the registry. Her guests exchanged glances. One muttered, Funny you mention that. We flagged suspicious similarities with internal NASA designs, but it's above my pay grade to dig further. Above mine, too, Evelyn said smoothly, pouring more wine. Still interesting, isn't it? When they left, she had what she needed, confirmation that others had noticed the theft. They were just too timid to act. The first warning sign. 2 nights later, a courier envelope arrived under her door. No sender. Inside, a single sheet. Dr. Cho, stop looking into Orion. For your own sake. No signature, no address. Just the scent of toner still fresh. Evelyn read it twice, then slid it into her binder under threats, evidence. Her hands didn't tremble, if anything, they steadied. The more pressure she felt, the clearer her mind became. The escalation. Lawson called the next morning. His tone was sharper than before. I've reviewed everything. You were smart to write that clause, it's bulletproof. But Evelyn, listen carefully. Once we file, Orion Labs will retaliate. They'll drag your name, your career, your family. Are you ready for that? Evelyn stared at the rising steam from her coffee mug. I buried a husband at 38. I raised a son alone. I watched governments circle my work like vultures. I'm not afraid of being dragged. Silence. Then Lawson said, all right, then we'll fight. Mother and son, round one. That evening Julian called her, his voice sharp with rehearsed calm. Mom, Amara told me you've been snooping, visiting her office, asking around. Why? Evelyn didn't flinch. I want to know why my signature is missing from Orion's filings. A pause, then, you don't understand how business works. This is bigger than you. We're about to change the world. Evelyn's reply was ice. The world doesn't need to be changed by theft. Mom, she cut him off. If you're smart, you'll step back before the law forces you to. He hung up. That night, Evelyn opened her recorder and pressed play. She listened to Amara's voice from a gala 2 weeks prior, recorded when Evelyn had left her phone on the table near the bar. As long as the old woman doesn't notice, we're safe. Julian's too soft. I'll handle her if she asks questions. Evelyn sat in the dark, headphones on, the voice repeating. She felt no rage, only resolve hardening like cooling steel. The orbit had shifted. The escalation had begun, and Evelyn was not going to miss her launch window. The courtroom wasn't grand. No marble columns, no chandeliers, just a federal chamber in lower Manhattan, its walls lined with dull oak panels and its air heavy with fluorescent light. But to Evelyn, this room was bigger than any launch bay she had ever stood in. This was where orbits were corrected, not with thrusters but with truth, the hidden clause. Lawson opened with quiet precision, sliding the original contract across the table like a chess piece. Clause 7, he told the judge, tapping the page. Any derivative use of Dr. Cho's algorithm requires her direct, wet-ink signature. No such signature exists. Therefore, every filing Orion Labs has made is invalid on arrival. Across the aisle, Amara's attorneys shifted uncomfortably. Their arguments, inspiration, general framework, public domain overlap, all began to wilt under the black ink of Evelyn's meticulous foresight. Julian's breaking point. Julian sat beside Amara, jaw tight, eyes darting to his mother. He looked less like a CEO and more like the boy she remembered, the one who once promised to build without stealing. When the judge asked him directly, "Did you know your company filed under your mother's work without her signature?" His silence filled the room heavier than any confession. Amara leaned in, whispering furiously, but Julian didn't answer. His hands gripped the table as if it were the only thing keeping him upright. The audio bombshell. Evelyn remained composed as Lawson introduced Exhibit C, a clean audio recording. On the speakers, Amara's voice played. As long as the old woman doesn't notice, we're safe. Julian's too soft. I'll handle her if she asks questions. The room froze, reporters' pens scratched, even the judge's brows arched. Amara shot up, protesting. That was taken out of context. But context didn't matter. The arrogance in her tone was unmistakable. The verdict. 2 days later, the ruling came down swift and sharp. Orion Labs was barred from using Evelyn's algorithm in any capacity. All related patents were voided. Damages were to be paid in full to Dr. Evelyn Cho. Julian was removed from executive leadership pending federal review. When the judge's gavel fell, the sound wasn't just wood striking wood. To Evelyn, it was the echo of thrusters firing, a trajectory corrected mid-flight, a conversation without answers. Outside, Julian caught up with her. He looked hollow, stripped of the bravado that once dazzled investors. "Mom," he said quietly, "did you really have to do this?" Evelyn studied him, her son, her betrayer, her child. "I didn't destroy your career, Julian. I only took off the mask you put on yourself." He opened his mouth, closed it, then walked away, swallowed by the crowd. The new horizon. Weeks later, Evelyn signed papers not for profit but for transfer. She directed the restored algorithm into a non-profit consortium for disaster relief and climate research. No stock price attached, no investors cheering. Just science serving the living as it was meant to. She moved to a research station in Greenland, the sky above her alive with auroras and satellites streaking past. The quiet there wasn't lonely. It was pure. One morning, a letter arrived in her inbox, an actual paper envelope postmarked from New York, Julian's handwriting unsteady. "I'm not asking for forgiveness. I'm asking you to keep the light. If you ever step aside, the world will lose more than a mother. It will lose its compass." Evelyn folded the letter, set it beside her old black binder. Outside, a satellite winked across the Arctic sky. She didn't smile, not fully, but her chest loosened with something that felt like hope. Justice wasn't about victory. It was about orbit. And tonight, at 65, Evelyn Cho knew. Her orbit was still steady, and the world was back on course. 1 year later, Greenland Research Station. The wind over the ice shelf howled like an old engine, steady and endless. Evelyn Cho stood on the observation deck of the small civilian research station, wrapped in a parka, silver hair whipping across her face. The northern sky shimmered with green ribbons of aurora, bending and swaying like the equations she had once written across whiteboards at NASA. Here, there were no cameras, no investors, no boardrooms. Only weather data, satellite pings, and the simple rhythm of science stripped of ego. Evelyn had found peace not by retiring, but by recalibrating her orbit. Julian's path. News reached her in fragments. Orion Labs had collapsed, investors scattering like startled birds. Julian, once a darling of the tech press, now lectured at a community college in Queens, teaching young engineers how not to repeat his mistakes. He never called. But sometimes when Evelyn opened her inbox, she would find unsigned attachments. Papers on AI ethics, drafts of open-source projects, notes on how to keep corporate influence out of academia. They bore no name, but she knew whose hands had typed them. Amara's fall. Amara's name surfaced occasionally in headlines. Lawsuits, frozen accounts, whispers of investigations overseas. She had been the architect of ambition, but without Julian's compliance or Evelyn's silence, her empire crumbled. Evelyn read the articles with no joy. Justice wasn't satisfaction. It was necessity. The letter. On the first anniversary of the trial, another envelope arrived. This time, Julian had signed it. "Mom, I still don't expect forgiveness, but I've started again. Smaller, slower, humbler. Every day I remember your words. Science serves the living. I don't know if I'll ever earn back your trust, but I'm trying to earn my own." Evelyn pressed the letter against her chest, feeling the ache of what had been lost and the faint pulse of what might still be repaired. Reflection. That evening, she walked outside, the snow crunching under her boots. She looked up at the streaks of satellites crossing the sky, each one carrying the weight of humanity's ambition. Family, she thought, was no different from orbit. Without respect, without balance, gravity fails and everything drifts apart. But with correction, with patience, even a broken path can realign. She turned back toward the station, where younger researchers were laughing inside, papers spread across a glowing table. The future was theirs to build, and Evelyn had given them the compass to do it right. For the first time in years, she felt no bitterness, only clarity, Only the quiet strength of a woman who had stood against ambition and kept her orbit steady. Sparkle's final note. Justice isn't about punishment. It's about alignment. Respect, like gravity, is invisible, but without it, everything falls.